The morning the cherry tree died, it wasn't a gentle fading. It was a goddamn chainsaw massacre. I'd woken to the banshee wail of a two-stroke engine and the sickening thwack of timber hitting manicured sod. Peeking through my blinds, coffee. Mug halfway to my lips, I witnessed the arboreal assassination. Two beefy guys in matching polo shirts, the official uniform of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association Gestapo, I presumed, were hacking my beloved Bing cherry into mulch. My Bing. The one that gifted me buckets of ruby red sweetness every July, the one the damn robins serenaded at dawn. Gone. Reduced to wood chips, probably to be used in some sterile HOA-approved flower bed. But that wasn't the most surreal part of my Tuesday. Oh no. As the last branch shuddered to the ground, a low, rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp vibrated through my house. I staggered outside, still in my pajama pants emblazoned with tiny, ironic avocados, just in time to see it. Suspended beneath a goddamn Sikorsky S-64 sky crane, lumbering through the crisp suburban air like some metallic prehistoric beast, was a turret. Not a cute little Garden Folly turret. This was a turret. Gray stone, crenellated battlements, the whole medieval shebang. It was being gently lowered onto Karen's meticulously manicured front lawn, right where her prize-winning azaleas used to be. Karen. Just the name tasted like unsweetened grapefruit rind in my mouth. Karen. Rules are rules. Henderson. President. For life, or so she believed, of the Willow Creek HOA. A woman whose soul was likely composed of laminated bylaws and whose blood probably ran a precise shade of Benjamin Moore's agreeable gray. If there was a rule, Karen enforced it with the zeal of a medieval inquisitor. A rogue dandelion? A sternly worded letter? A basketball hoop left out overnight? A $50 fine. My slightly overgrown cherry tree, apparently, was an unapproved, vegetation exceeding designated height restrictions and lacking proper horticultural documentation. The nerve. The sight of that turret, however, perched incongruously amidst the petunias and the solar-powered garden gnomes, short-circuited my outrage. It was so utterly, spectacularly unhinged, it almost impressed me. Almost. My Bing was still dead. What in the actual hell? I muttered, the avocado pajamas suddenly feeling inadequate for the sheer level of suburban absurdity unfolding before me. A voice, sharp and imperious as a freshly sharpened No. 2 pencil, cut through the morning air. "Excuse me? Could you possibly keep your gaping to a minimum? Some of us are trying to supervise important property enhancements." There she was, Karen, standing on her porch, arms crossed, sporting a crisp white pantsuit that screamed, "I have power and I'm not afraid to use it." Her blonde bob was helmet-like, unmoving even in the slight breeze. Her sunglasses, perched precariously on her nose, somehow managed to convey both disapproval and an air of self-importance. "Enhancements?" I repeated, gesturing vaguely at the multi-ton stone structure dominating her yard. "Karen, that looks like something out of a goddamn Renaissance fair." "It's a historically accurate belvedere," she corrected, her voice dripping with condescension. "And it is perfectly within my rights as a property owner. But the height restrictions?" I sputtered, momentarily forgetting my own arboreal tragedy in the face of this new development. "Didn't you just, murder my tree for being too tall?" Karen adjusted her sunglasses, a glint of something unreadable in her eyes. "That was a safety hazard and a violation of Section 3, Subsection B, Paragraph 7 of the Willow Creek Covenant regarding arboreal overgrowth. This," she gestured regally at the turret, "is an architectural feature, pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee." Pre-approved? The same committee that sent me 3 notices about the unacceptable shade of beige of my birdhouse? Something was rotten in the state of Willow Creek, and it smelled suspiciously of hypocrisy and freshly cut cherry wood. That's when it hit me. The injustice. The sheer, unadulterated gall of this woman. She could butcher my beloved tree, but she could airlift a medieval fortification onto her lawn. The scales of suburban justice were not just tilted, they were teetering on the brink of collapse. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. "You know what, Karen?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "You want architectural features? You want landscaping? Fine. You just wait and see what kind of enhancements I have in mind." As the helicopter whirred away, leaving Karen standing sentinel before her stone monstrosity, A seed of an idea began to sprout in the fertile ground of my fury. It was an idea as audacious as Karen's turret, as defiant as a single dandelion, pushing through concrete. It was an idea that would blossom into a full-blown suburban rebellion. I was going to plant trees, hundreds of them, and I was going to declare myself the Lord of the Orchard. My declaration wasn't delivered via town, crier, or engraved on a stone tablet. It was a muttered promise to the ghost of my cherry tree and a frantic Google search for wholesale fruit tree nurseries near Willow Creek. The next few days were a blur of online ordering, clandestine deliveries, and the rhythmic thud of shovels breaking ground. My backyard, once a respectable patch of lawn with a sensible patio set, was rapidly transforming into a chaotic, muddy landscape dotted with hundreds of tiny saplings: apple, pear, plum, peach, apricot, if it bore fruit and could survive. The Zone 7 climate, I ordered it. The neighbors, initially curious about the sudden influx of delivery trucks to my usually quiet cul-de-sac, soon grew concerned. Martha from next door, a sweet old lady whose only transgression against HOA rules was occasionally leaving her decorative flamingos out past dusk, peered over the fence with wide, worried eyes. "Arthur, dear?" she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you starting a forest like that, Martha?" I replied, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my dirt-stained glove. "Consider it horticultural defiance." Across the street, Bob, the grill master Johnson, a man whose life revolved around perfectly seared steaks and meticulously maintained lawn stripes, watched my progress with a mixture of bewilderment and disapproval. I could practically see the veins throbbing in his temples as another delivery truck rumbled up my driveway, unloading a pallet stacked high with potted fig trees. The neighborhood grapevine, usually a delicate tendril of polite gossip, was now a thick, thorny vine buzzing with speculation. Whispers of "Arthur's gone mad" and "someone should call the authorities" drifted on the afternoon breeze. But no one dared to confront me directly. Not yet. The sheer scale of my operation seemed to have them temporarily paralyzed. Meanwhile, Karen's Belvedere, or architectural feature, as she insisted on calling it, loomed over the neighborhood like a stone sentinel of suburban tyranny. She'd even installed a little flag on top, a custom-made banner featuring the Willow Creek HOA logo crossed out with a red "No." Subtle, she was not. My own acts of defiance, however, were far from subtle. Every evening, as the sun dipped, below the horizon, casting long shadows across my burgeoning orchard, I would stand amidst my saplings, a rusty garden hoe held aloft like a scepter, and declare myself, in a voice loud enough for Karen to surely hear, Lord Arthur, first of his name, defender of the fruit and protector of the pollinators. The reactions were priceless. Bob would clutch his chest and retreat indoors. Martha would giggle nervously behind her hand. And from the direction of Castle Karen, I would occasionally hear a muffled shriek followed by the sharp snap of window blinds being drawn shut. The HOA, predictably, was not amused. The first official communication arrived in the form of a certified letter, thick with legalese and dripping with bureaucratic disapproval. It cited numerous violations: unapproved landscaping, excessive soil disturbance, potential obstruction of drainage easements, and, my personal favorite, creation of an aesthetically unharmonious environment. The fines were astronomical, enough to make my bank account whimper. I pinned the letter to a newly planted apple tree with a rusty nail. Beneath it, I hung a hand-painted sign that read, "These fines are as fruitless as your tyranny, Karen." The gloves were officially off. This wasn't just about a tree anymore. This was about freedom. This was about sticking it to the man, or in this case the woman with the medieval turret and the laminated sole. This was about the silent majority of Willow Creek, the ones who secretly chafed under Karen's iron fist, finally finding a champion, albeit a slightly unhinged, fruit-obsessed champion. The rebellion had begun, and it smelled faintly of blooming apple blossoms. My one-man horticultural insurgency was surprisingly contagious. Initially, the neighbors kept their distance, offering nervous smiles and wide berths as I toiled in my ever-expanding orchard. But slowly, subtly, the seeds of rebellion began to sprout in their own yards. Old Mr. Henderson, no relation to Karen, much to his constant relief, a retired history teacher who'd always struck me as a quiet, unassuming man, suddenly replaced his perfectly manicured rose bushes with a riotous patch of sunflowers that towered over the fence line, defiantly exceeding the HOA's acceptable floral height by at least 3 feet. When I caught his eye one afternoon, he winked and gave me a thumbs up. Across the street, Sarah Miller, a young mother constantly bombarded with violation notices for her kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk, started planting a guerrilla garden along the curb, a vibrant mix of wildflowers and herbs that the HOA's meticulously planned landscaping budget had somehow overlooked. Even Bob, the grill master Johnson, initially my staunchest critic, seemed to be softening. I'd caught him surreptitiously admiring my burgeoning peach trees one evening, a wistful look on his face. Turns out, his own attempts at growing tomatoes had been repeatedly thwarted by Karen's strict regulations on vegetable gardens. Must be contained within designated raised beds of approved dimensions. The turning point came during the infamous birdhouse brouhaha. Mrs. Higgins, a sweet, elderly woman who lived down the street and whose only joy in life seemed to be watching the bluebirds nest in her hand-painted birdhouses, received a notice demanding the removal of her non-regulation avian dwellings due to their unapproved color palette. They were pastel, apparently a grave offense. That night, under the cloak of darkness, a small group of us, Mr. Henderson, Sarah, and even a surprisingly enthusiastic Bob, gathered in my orchard. Armed with flashlights and cans of brightly colored spray paint, we embarked on a mission of avian solidarity. The next morning, every tree in my orchard and several in my neighbors' yards sported a dazzling array of wildly painted birdhouses, psychedelic swirls, polka dots, even one that looked suspiciously like Karen's turret, albeit much smaller, and with a bird pooping on top. The HOA's reaction was swift and predictable. Another flurry of certified letters, this time threatening legal action. Karen herself patrolled the neighborhood in her golf cart, her face a mask of incandescent fury, pointing and shrieking at the offending birdhouses as if they were instruments of the apocalypse. But the mood in Willow Creek had shifted. The fear of Karen's wrath was slowly being replaced by a sense of shared defiance, a giddy sense of rebellion against the petty tyranny of the HOA. People started leaving anonymous gifts of fertilizer and gardening gloves on my doorstep. Evening proclamations as Lord of the Orchard were now often met with cheers and the clinking of wine glasses from neighboring patios. Even some of the more traditionally compliant residents were starting to show cracks in their HOA armor. I overheard Mrs. Davison, usually a staunch supporter of Karen's regime, complaining loudly to her husband about the sheer waste of paper in all these violation notices. The conflict was no longer just me versus Karen. It was the burgeoning spirit of the neighborhood versus the iron fist of the HOA. And my orchard, with its hundreds of defiant fruit trees and its ever-growing collection of brightly colored birdhouses, had become the unlikely symbol of that resistance. As my orchard flourished, so did the chaos in Willow Creek. The HOA descended into a state of near-constant emergency meetings, their pristine community center echoing with shouting matches and the rustling of furiously flipped bylaws. Karen, fueled by righteous indignation and copious amounts of Chardonnay, or so the rumors whispered, doubled down on her enforcement efforts. The fines escalated to ludicrous levels. Mr. Henderson was threatened with foreclosure for his sunflowers. Sarah received a cease and desist order regarding her unauthorized public flora. Even Bob got a sternly worded letter about the unapproved aroma of charcoal briquettes emanating from his grill outside designated grilling hours. Karen's own behavior became increasingly erratic. She installed security cameras that swiveled, ominously, monitoring every movement in the neighborhood. She started issuing official HOA observation reports, detailing minor infractions, delivered with the solemnity of papal decrees. And then, of course, there was the continued construction on Castle Karen. The Belvedere, it turned out, was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, more bizarre architectural elements began to appear on Karen's property. First, it was a stone gargoyle perched precariously on the roof. Then came a wrought iron gate that looked like it belonged to a Victorian cemetery. Finally, the pièce de résistance, a genuine, honest-to-goodness weather vane shaped like a pointing finger, forever accusing the rest of Willow Creek of some unspecified transgression. The neighborhood kids started calling her house Castle Karen, a nickname that, much to my amusement, seemed to stick. Someone even created a satirical Instagram account, In Castle Karen Chronicles, which quickly gained a surprising number of followers, featuring blurry photos of Karen's increasingly bizarre property and hilariously captioned official HOA violations of everyday suburban life. The annual Willow Creek HOA barbecue, usually a stilted affair of forced pleasantries and awkward small talk, became the unlikely battleground for the escalating conflict. I arrived with a basket overflowing with freshly picked peaches, offering them to anyone brave enough to accept. Karen, upon seeing my unauthorized agricultural produce, let out a shriek that could curdle milk and demanded their immediate confiscation. A tense standoff ensued, with half the attendees nervously eyeing the peaches and the other half, trying to subtly sneak them into their picnic baskets. Bob Johnson, surprisingly, stepped forward and declared loudly, "These peaches smell damn good, Arthur. And last I checked, there ain't no bylaw against a friendly neighbor offering fruit." He took a large bite, juice dripping down his chin, and winked at me. It was a small act of defiance, but in the stifling atmosphere of the HOA barbecue, it felt like a revolutionary one. The meeting that followed was pure pandemonium. The agenda, which was supposed to focus on seasonal landscaping guidelines, quickly devolved into a shouting match about birdhouses, sunflowers, and the architectural monstrosity that was Castle Karen. Accusations flew, bylaws were brandished like weapons, and at one point, Mrs. Higgins actually threw a handful of pastel-painted birdseed at Karen. The climax came when Mr. Henderson, emboldened by Bob's peach-fueled rebellion, stood up and proposed a vote of no confidence in Karen's presidency. The room erupted in a cacophony of cheers, jeers, and nervous coughs. The vote was chaotic, conducted with hastily scribbled ballots on paper napkins, but the result was clear. Karen had lost. For a fleeting moment, a sense of jubilant relief washed over Willow Creek. But our victory was short-lived. Karen, her face a mask of wounded fury, declared the vote invalid due to multiple procedural irregularities and stormed out of the community center, vowing to fight this insurrection with every fiber of her laminated being. The war for Willow Creek was far from over, but for the first time we had a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, the seeds of rebellion we had sown were finally starting to bear fruit. The Castle Karen Chronicles Instagram account, fueled by increasingly bizarre photos of Karen's property and the escalating neighborhood drama, went viral. Suddenly, Willow Creek wasn't just a sleepy suburb, it was a national laughingstock, a cautionary tale of HOA overreach and the glorious absurdity of suburban warfare. News crews descended, eager to interview the Lord of the Orchard and the Queen of the Belvedere. My 15 minutes of fame were surreal. I found myself explaining the intricacies of fruit tree pollination to a bewildered CNN reporter, while Karen, in a separate interview, ranted about the anarchic horticultural terrorism plaguing her once pristine community. The attention, however, brought with it unwanted scrutiny. The city's code enforcement department, spurred by a deluge of complaints, mostly from Karen, decided to pay Willow Creek a visit. Suddenly, my aesthetically unharmonious orchard wasn't just an HOA violation. It was a potential zoning issue. A stern-faced inspector, clipboard in hand, marched through my rows of young trees, muttering about setback requirements and impermissible agricultural activity in a residential zone. The fines threatened by the city dwarfed even Karen's exorbitant HOA fees. My Lord of the Orchard reign was suddenly facing a very real legal lemon. Meanwhile, Karen, emboldened by the city's intervention, launched a full-scale legal assault. Her lawyer, a slick individual with a name that sounded suspiciously like Slitherspoon, sent me a thick packet of legal documents, accusing me of everything from intentional infliction of emotional distress to creation of a private nuisance. The lawsuit demanded the immediate removal of my orchard and punitive damages that would likely leave me living in a cardboard box adorned with wilting apple blossoms. The neighborhood, however, rallied behind me. Martha organized a Save the Orchard bake sale, the proceeds of which went to a legal defense fund. Bob held a Grill for Freedom barbecue, donating a portion of the profits. Even some of the more cautious residents, horrified by Karen's relentless escalation, started offering quiet support. The HOA meeting to discuss the orchard crisis was a tense affair. Karen, flanked by Slitherspoon, looked like a Bond villain addressing her captive audience. I, surrounded by a motley crew of orchard defenders, Martha clutching a rolling pin, Bob sporting a Lord of the Orchard Legal Defense Fund t-shirt, and Mr. Henderson holding a sign that read, "Give peas a chance, and fruit trees too," felt like the leader of a ragtag rebel alliance facing the galactic empire. Slitherspoon droned on about property values, zoning regulations, and the clear and present danger posed by my burgeoning fruit forest. Karen punctuated his legal jargon with dramatic pronouncements about the erosion of community standards and the visual blight inflicted upon Willow Creek. Then it was my turn. I didn't have fancy legal briefs or a high-priced lawyer. I had stories. I told them about the joy of picking fresh cherries with my grandmother as a child, the satisfaction of biting into a sun-ripened peach, the simple beauty of a blooming apple tree in spring. I spoke about the bees and the birds that my orchard attracted, the sense of community that had blossomed alongside my saplings. I even brought a basket of my finest fruit, plump, juicy plums that I offered to the HOA board members. Most refused, their noses wrinkled in disdain. But old Mrs. Abernathy, the only board member who had ever offered me a kind word, hesitantly accepted a plum and took a small bite. Her eyes widened. "Arthur," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, "these are delicious." It was a small crack in Karen's seemingly impenetrable wall of authority, but it was enough. The tide of public opinion, already leaning in my favor thanks to the viral sensation of Castle Karen Chronicles, began to shift within the meeting room. People started speaking up, sharing stories of their own frustrations with the HOAs, petty rules, their appreciation for the unexpected beauty and bounty of my orchard. The vote on whether to formally demand the orchard's removal was surprisingly close. And when the final tally was announced, a tie, the room erupted. Karen, apoplectic, declared a procedural anomaly and demanded a revote. But the momentum had swung. Several previously staunch Karen supporters, swayed by Mrs. Abernathy's plum-induced epiphany and the growing public backlash, abstained. The motion to condemn my orchard failed. It was a partial victory, a stay of execution for my beloved trees. But the legal battle with Karen was far from over. Slitherspoon promised further action, and Karen's glare could curdle the sweetest fruit. However, something had changed in Willow Creek. The fear was receding, replaced by a newfound sense of solidarity and a shared appreciation for the absurd drama that had engulfed their once sleepy suburb. We were no longer just neighbors. We were fellow rebels, united against the tyranny of laminated bylaws and oversized turrets. And my orchard, the unlikely battleground of this suburban war, stood as a testament to the power of a little bit of defiance and a whole lot of fruit trees. The legal battle dragged on, a tedious back and forth of motions, depositions, and Slitherspoon's increasingly ridiculous arguments about the negative externalities of my pear trees. But the tide had turned in the court of public opinion. Castle Karen Chronicles continued to chronicle Karen's increasingly unhinged behavior, attracting even more followers and turning her into a figure of national ridicule. Then came the fateful incident of the Great Gazebo debacle. Karen, in a misguided attempt to assert her architectural dominance after the Belvedere backlash, decided to erect a massive Victorian-style gazebo in her backyard, without ironically submitting the plans to the Architectural Review Committee. The hypocrisy was too delicious to ignore. The Castle Karen Chronicles account went into overdrive, juxtaposing photos of Karen's illegal gazebo with screenshots of her numerous violation notices to other residents for far less egregious offenses. The hashtag #JustGazeboGate trended for the HOA, already fractured by the no-confidence vote, finally imploded. A new election was held, and a slate of surprisingly reasonable candidates, including a very persuasive Mrs. Higgins, campaigning on a platform of birdhouse freedom. And an end to petty fine swept into power. One of their first acts was to formally rescind all violation notices related to my orchard and Mr. Henderson's sunflowers. Karen, stripped of her power and facing a neighborhood united against her, retreated into Castle Karen. The security cameras remained. The gargoyle still leered, but the imperious pronouncements ceased. The flag on the Belvedere, once a symbol of HOA tyranny, now just flapped forlornly in the breeze. The legal case eventually fizzled out. Slitherspoon, sensing the shift in the wind, advised Karen to settle for a nominal fee and a promise from me to maintain my orchard in a manner consistent with general suburban landscaping standards. A clause I happily agreed to, with a mental asterisk that general suburban landscaping standards were now clearly defined by hundreds of fruit trees. The poetic justice, however, came in the most unexpected form. It turned out that Karen, in her obsessive enforcement of the HOA's arcane rules, had overlooked one crucial detail: the property line. A quiet survey, initiated by the new HOA board, revealed that a significant portion of Castle Karen, including the Belvedere, actually encroached onto common land. The new HOA, with a delicious sense of irony, issued Karen a formal violation notice demanding the removal of the encroaching structures. The image of a furious Karen being served with the notice, her face contorted in disbelief, became the most popular post in our Castle Karen Chronicles history. The removal of the Belvedere was a spectacle. The same Sikorsky sky crane that had delivered, it now returned, lifting the stone turret back into the sky, a symbol of fallen tyranny ascending into the clouds. The neighborhood gathered to watch, a mixture of schadenfreude and quiet satisfaction on their faces. As for me, Lord Arthur, first of his name, defender of the fruit and protector of the pollinators, my orchard continued to flourish. It became a community gathering place, a source of fresh fruit for neighbors, and a vibrant, buzzing ecosystem that defied the sterile uniformity of Willow Creek's past. One sunny afternoon, as I was harvesting a basket of ripe apples, Martha approached, me a twinkle in her eye. Arthur, dear, she said, I was thinking, perhaps a few more birdhouses? Something avant-garde? I grinned. The rebellion might have been won, but the spirit of delightful defiance, like a well-tended fruit tree, would continue to bear unexpected and wonderful fruit in the years to come. And as I looked out at my sprawling orchard, the setting sun casting long shadows across the leafy canopy, I knew that the true Lord of Willow Creek wasn't the one with the biggest castle, but the one with the most fruit to share. Years passed in Willow Creek, seasons turning in rhythm with the blossoming and fruiting of my ever-expanding orchard. The initial chaos subsided, replaced by a comfortable, if slightly eccentric, normalcy. The new HOA, under Mrs. Higgins's surprisingly effective leadership, focused on sensible matters like pothole repair and community gardens, leaving the more whimsical landscaping choices to individual homeowners. The pastel birdhouses multiplied, sunflowers became a common sight, and even Bob Johnson started experimenting with a small, surprisingly successful patch of heirloom tomatoes in his backyard. Castle Karen, however, remained a peculiar landmark. Stripped of its encroaching belvedere, it still loomed, a testament to a bygone era of suburban autocracy. Karen herself became a recluse, rarely seen beyond the wrought iron gates. Rumors circulated. She'd joined an online community of former HOA presidents. She was writing a memoir titled My Battle for Bylaws. She'd taken up competitive miniature golf with a fiercely rule-abiding group. Whatever her post-presidency life entailed, it remained shrouded in the same air of rigid mystery that had defined her reign. My orchard, meanwhile, thrived. The once tiny saplings had matured into robust trees, their branches heavy with fruit. Each season, it became a beloved part of Willow Creek life. Kids would sneak in to pilfer ripe berries, families held impromptu picnics under the shade of the apple trees, and the annual Lord of the Orchard Harvest Festival became a surprisingly popular community event, complete with pie eating, contests, and cider pressing demonstrations. The seeds of my rebellion, both literal and metaphorical, had scattered far beyond my property line. Inspired by my defiance, other neighborhoods in the surrounding suburbs began to push back against overly restrictive HOAs. A sunflower solidarity movement bloomed in a neighboring community facing similar floral height restrictions. A group of teenagers in another development started a satirical TikTok account mocking their HOA's obsession with lawn uniformity. The story of Willow Creek and the Lord of the Orchard had become a local legend, a symbol of standing up to petty authority with a healthy dose of absurdity and a whole lot of fruit. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I was pruning some late-season apple branches, a young woman approached my property. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. She had a determined glint in her eyes and carried a thick, bound document. "Mr. Davies?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. "That's me," I replied, wiping pruning shears on my well-worn gardening gloves. "My name is Emily Carter," she said, extending her hand. "I grew up a few streets over. You probably don't remember me, but your situation with the old HOA was quite an inspiration," I chuckled. "Inspiration? I thought I was just being a stubborn old fool with too many trees." Emily smiled. "You were more than that. You showed us that we didn't have to blindly accept every arbitrary rule. You stood up for something you believed in." She gestured to the document in her hand. "I've been working with a group of homeowners in my new neighborhood. Our HOA is even more restrictive than the old Willow Creek one. They're trying to dictate everything, down to the color of our welcome mats." My eyebrows shot up. "Welcome? Mat color? That's a new level of petty." "Exactly," Emily said, her voice hardening. "So we're fighting back. We've been researching our rights, gathering signatures, and we're planning to challenge some of their more ridiculous bylaws." She opened the document, revealing pages filled with legal text and handwritten notes. We were hoping, perhaps you'd be willing to offer some advice. A slow smile spread across my face. The seeds were still scattering. The orchard's influence was still growing. Emily, I said, a familiar spark of rebellious energy igniting within me. Tell me everything. We spent the next few hours poring over her documents, strategizing, and sharing stories of HOA. Absurdity. I recounted the epic battles of the birdhouses and the Belvedere, the tactical deployment of pastel paint, and the strategic placement of particularly fragrant compost heaps. Emily listened intently, taking notes and occasionally bursting into laughter. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the golden leaves of my apple trees, Emily stood to leave. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice filled with newfound determination. "You've given us hope." "Just call me Arthur," I replied, shaking her hand. "And remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon against tyranny is a well-placed fruit tree and a healthy dose of stubbornness." A few weeks later, I received an email from Emily. It contained photos of her neighborhood's latest act of defiance. Rows of brightly colored non-regulation welcome mats proclaiming slogans like "Welcome, regardless of color," "Home sweet, non-compliant home," and my personal favorite, "Beware of fruit-loving rebels." The email ended with a simple message: the orchard spirit lives on, and it did. Years turned into decades. I grew older, my steps a little slower, my beard a little whiter. But the orchard remained my sanctuary, a testament to the power of one person's refusal to bow to the absurd. The annual Harvest Festival continued, drawing people from all over the region. Children who had once pilfered berries now brought their own children to pick apples. Willow Creek, once defined by its rigid rules and Karen's iron fist, had become known for its vibrant community and its legendary orchard. One spring morning, as the apple blossoms filled the air with their delicate fragrance, I sat on a weathered bench beneath my original Bing cherry tree, a new one, planted years ago in memoriam. A young boy, no older than 7 or 8, approached me, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mister," he asked, pointing to the sprawling orchard, "did you really plant all these trees?" I smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached my eyes. "Every single one," I replied. "Why?" he asked, his brow furrowed in childlike wonder. I looked out at the blooming branches, at the vibrant tapestry of green and the promise of future fruit. I thought of Karen and her castle, of the battles fought and the small victories won. I thought of Emily and her welcome mat rebellion, and all the other little acts of defiance that had blossomed in the wake of my arboreal uprising. "Well, son," I said, leaning back against the sturdy trunk of the cherry tree, "sometimes you just have to plant your own kind of beauty in a world that tries to prune it all away." And the orchard, in its chaotic, fruitful glory, stood as a living testament to that simple truth. The Lord of the Orchard, no longer a petty title, but a symbol of resilience and the enduring power of a little bit of rebellion, watched as another generation began to discover the sweet taste of freedom, one homegrown fruit at a time. The seeds had scattered, the orchard had endured, and the spirit of joyful defiance continued to bloom in the most unexpected corners of the suburban landscape.